it's just as nice as last year. I would say it's like nothing changed. I'll just say for the order of business, I suppose that if you're not yet seated, please follow my example. I will now sit. Find yourself a nice spot. It's nicer to sit than to stand because we are going to be spending an hour together. So that is a bit of time. And perhaps for the people upstairs who are enjoying some great conversations, maybe now is the time to either join us downstairs or close the doors. And I'm sure that message will somehow find its way upstairs as well. Okay, so let's get started then. We want to be talking today about advancing, I think you can read this above us. No, not yet. Oh, there we go. About advancing brain health. My name is Peter Van Ham. I'm a journalist and author. And I'm very happy, though, that you won't be hearing from me today, but from our panelists, because otherwise the conversation would be very brief. I do have a wonderful set of panelists, and I want to introduce you to all of them. I did it the old school way. I wrote my cards. It's like, in late night that they still do that. You know that? Who is it again? That likes his cards being written by hand. Does anybody of you know that? No? This is, and instead of working with the auto cue, So I still like to do that as well. Anyway, I'd like to introduce you to Tracy Laabs. She's the head of innovation and partnership at the Wyss Center for Bio and Neuroengineering. Elisabeth Staudinger, managing board chair at Siemens Healthineers. Jesus Mantas, who is board member at Biogen and former head of IBM Consulting. You look at me as if I'm going to get it wrong, but
I'm very curious.
And finally, Chiara Moroni, who is global policy and government affairs strategy lead. Wow, I didn't know I was going to get through that at Bristol Myers Squibb. Please welcome all of them. So we'll be talking about advancing brain health, and I just want to echo what Dr. Tedros said just before we get started, which he said it's an historically overlooked topic, and he mentioned some numbers, and I've been fed a couple of numbers as well. The striking sort of juxtaposition, I would say, that I would start with to get us into this conversation is this idea of the discrepancy between the funding that goes into machine intelligence versus the funding that goes into brain or human intelligence. So when machine intelligence, AI, artificial intelligence, we're looking, of course, at hundreds of billions of dollars nowadays. Perhaps it's in the trillions, who knows by now. I've understood that when you look at the societal or the healthcare cost of Alzheimer's in the US alone, the direct cost, $350 billion per year, with funding at about $4 billion. $4 billion still sounds like a lot to me, but if you compare that to an annual cost, a direct cost of $350 billion, not even to mention the human and social cost, of course, then I think we all understand that there's a huge discrepancy there. So let's talk about how we can drive capital, innovation, and impact, which is ultimately what we care about, of course, in advancing brain health. Tracy, can I start with you?
Sure.
Is that okay? Because I'll start with you. Maybe just because you're closest to me, both physically, and you also live in Geneva like me, which I love. Tell us a little bit about what you do at the Wyss Center and how that can advance brain health, which is our ultimate goal of today.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Thank you, Peter, and also thanks to the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, our great partner in the Brain House this year. We're very happy to be here.
Tracy, I'm going to just do one more thing. I'm going to ask if anyone of the organization can go upstairs and just remind our friends from the upstairs floor that it's maybe the time to close the door, because we really want to listen to you. It reminds me a bit of that song. The song of like, I live upstairs from you. I think you've heard me before. We certainly have heard you before.
Surely in Geneva, we have heard them.
But do go ahead now. I think the message has come through.
Thank you. So it's great to be here. I'm Tracy Laabs. I lead R&D and strategic partnerships at the Wyss Center, as Peter mentioned. We are a nonprofit, primarily philanthropically funded by Hans-Jörg Wyss, who I should say has donated over 1 billion to the brain economy, let's say. And we are primarily focused on incentivizing translation. So we work very closely. We sit in a partnership ecosystem with academic partners, with industrial partners, with entrepreneurial partners and VCs, and clinical partners, probably most importantly, to try to drive academic innovations towards translation. So we work very closely with a number of early stage startups. I'm not sure if anyone here knows, but I think depending on who you ask, up to 90% of life science startups fail. And so at the V Center, we're really trying to change that for startups primarily focused on developing technology for neurology and psychiatry. And so one of the big things I think that's really important to say, and we've heard probably all week, and I know everybody's sort of having Davos fatigue at this point, is that there's a real need for multidisciplinary collaboration to drive all of this innovation. Of course, we need capital, we need innovation, but I'm going to argue here that translation and innovation sometimes seem almost on two opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's really important to have capital to do the primarily unsexy things like documentation and regulatory, and really making sure that when these life science startups are ready to hit the market, there is a market, there's reimbursement, et cetera.
Tell us, Tracy, as a follow-up, so the Hans-Jörg Wyss Foundation is, I suppose, an NGO or a non-profit organization or a philanthropic organization. Can you tell us a bit about how it positions itself legally, let's say, and then also the specific role it plays in that ecosystem of funding and bringing to market brain health innovations?
Sure. So the Wyss Foundation is the primary foundation of Hans-Jörg Wyss, and they're actually located in Washington, D.C.
Who is, I suppose, an entrepreneur who was
Yes.
And who created a foundation.
He's
for
a
his
Swiss philanthropist and entrepreneur who was the CEO of Synthes, the company that was bought by Johnson & Johnson. They did orthopedic implants. And he has signed the Giving Pledge, and his primary foundation, located in Washington, D.C., focuses a lot on land conservation and a number of other sort of social impact issues. He also funds the Wyss Institute at Harvard, which many people probably have heard of. They are also embedded within Harvard, and so they're also focused on translating some of those really great academic innovations out of Harvard. The Wyss Center for Neuroengineering, we are an independent legal entity in the Canton of Geneva. So we're an independent foundation who's partnering with academic organizations, industry, and really catalyzing with our mission of translating innovations in brain health.
And I suppose you must find it a very purposeful mission, and therefore one that's very needed. Very briefly, before I get to the next panelist, can you tell us a little bit about where we are when it comes to sort of the scientific breakthroughs and how they get to market, when they get to market, and just how that's evolving nowadays?
So it's evolving very rapidly for things like brain-computer interfaces. I'm sure everybody's heard there's an inordinate amount of capital actually going into brain-computer interfaces right now. I think one of the things that's really challenging is the health economics aspect of it. So we're really good at the innovation side. We're really good at driving capital. But I think that it needs to have a lot of continuity, because especially innovations in brain health require long timelines, regulatory hurdles, let's say, that people have to get over. And we also really need to make sure that the innovations are actually fitting within clinical workflows. And we're doing a good job. There's a lot of AI out there that's, last week I was actually with 24 entrepreneurs at the Engineering Medicine Biology Society judging a pitch contest. So I'm very hopeful, and I'm very, there's a lot of really, really awesome innovations to come. I think we just need to make sure that we're incentivizing the translation with the capital that we can bring for that.
Excellent. Maybe, Elisabeth, let me turn to you now. You're on the board of Siemens Healthineers, which we know, of course, as one of the very successful former parts, I suppose, of Siemens. I suppose you're still a sort of 20 or 30% tied to Siemens. What is the structure?
It's at the moment actually still a majority shareholding, but Siemens is in the process of divesting.
By next
additional
year,
parts
maybe
of
the
Siemens
percentage has
Healthineers.
changed. But we won't get the scoop here, I suppose. But it's also not my question. But the question that I do have for you is, obviously, historically, large enterprises like Siemens have played an important role in being sort of, you use your word translator, in being sort of the companies that translate or that bring innovations to the market. Tell us about the role that Siemens Healthineers plays today, and what does that mean for brain health going forward and advances in it?
Right, so Siemens Healthineers is a company which is engaged in imaging anything you need to look inside the body. We are very active in radiation therapy, so when it comes to fighting tumors, killing tumors, essentially trying to make them shrink, and we have a strong base also in blood testing. If we now look at the space of Alzheimer's, there is two areas where we really play a role and contribute. Number one, our MRI scanners, and here's especially the very high field, very high strength magnet field strength magnets are one of the important backbones of brain research. Yeah, so anybody who wants to do very sophisticated brain research, many of these people actually work with these MRI scanners. And if you're interested, you may want to Google a word called tractography.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Tractography. And then you will see amazing pictures of brains at work, right? It's not just the normal radiological image, it's very colorful and it shows you exactly how the information is flowing in the brain and what is connected to what, and it lights up differently depending on what the research subject is doing or looking at or thinking about. And it's one way or one window for us to understand the brain better. So this is one space where we are active. And when it comes to Alzheimer's, I mean, at some point, and it's maybe, don't know how, quite a number of years ago, it became clear that there is a link between plaques in the brain. And there also, at some point, became traces available which help you kind of mark those plaques in the brain. And this is a space where we do two things. On the one hand side, we provide the imaging equipment you can use for that diagnosis. And we also make the traces. We don't develop the traces. This is a pharma type of product. But we are the ones who make them and deploy them in the imaging process. So we've been very close to the diagnosis of Alzheimer's for many, many years. But it always felt a bit stuck, right? Because then you have plaques, but then what's next? Right? And for many years, there was no next. So things stayed kind of a bit, yeah, it's possible, people do it, but it didn't really have impact. And we've now reached a point in time with first disease-modifying treatments becoming available, where we can build on that knowledge foundation that we've created over the last years. And I think things are at an inflection point, and there's a real opportunity for things to take off to completely new territory.
That's a very hopeful message you bring. If I bring it to some sort of, in other fields of medicine and science, we've seen indeed enormous progress just in the last 1, 2, 3 years, often tied to sort of increased computing power, artificial intelligence. I think, of course, of the proteins and the DNA and so on. How would you sort of characterize the progress that's been made on Alzheimer in the past couple of years to the enormous progress that we've seen in some other fields, and to what extent can we expect a similar quantum leap in Alzheimer's in the next 1, 2, 3 years already?
I do believe you're at this inflection point, right? With treatment somehow becoming realistically available, also with the knowledge of kind of who can benefit from this treatment, so you can specifically also select patients who have the highest chance of benefiting from this. I think this is the starting point of moving from just knowing disease is present to actually being able to do something about this. And since it's such a burden, and we feel a real push from society, from patients, from everywhere to look for ways of making these treatments available to patients as quickly and as inexpensively as possible.
Excellent. Jesus, maybe let me turn to you now. You're on the board of Biogen, previously head of IBM Consulting, I already mentioned. We're going to be talking a little bit more about capital now and how finance can make this progress a reality for patients, on the ground. Can you tell us from your vantage point, from the Biogen vantage point, and your previous experience, I suppose, at IBM Consulting, what is that lever role that capital can play? Can you give us an idea of the size of the gap that we currently face and how we can fill that? I wanted to ask you an easy question to start, Jesus.
And you said we have an hour?
Yeah, exactly.
No, thank you for having me in the panel. I think it's good to start with characterizing what is my viewpoint, because I'm probably the least knowledgeable in the field in this panel, because I don't come from healthcare or medicine.
Sure.
I come from the world of technology and business, and that is a little bit of my contribution to the board of IFF or Biogen is actually coming. There is a phrase that we say in Spain. Ignorancia es atrevida, which means ignorance is very daring. So I bring, my point of view is ignorance and a lot of curiosity. And I happen to ask a lot of questions that actually come up or generate new ideas. So the way I look at it, when you have a hammer, everything you see everywhere are nails. So my hammer is technology. So when I started learning about the problem of brain health, I started looking for those parallels. I said, okay, so if you look at it, at the entire field, you have some hardware problems and you have some software problems. The hardware problems is beta amyloid plaque. It's figuring out, okay, if we can detect it, can we prove there is a correlation between that plaque? Can we prove there is a correlation with removing that plaque and improving the symptoms? And that was for decades. It was a big debate. In some corners, there may still be a big debate, but now, as you said, there are a couple of drugs approved that actually they have demonstrated a reduction of the cognitive decline when you actually reduce that, and then it shed light on other biomarkers like the tau protein, and then we're advancing the field in terms of understanding, addressing the hardware problems, meaning if you fix the hardware, you can kind of create a positive outcome. I think for those problems, there is a well-understood mechanism of financing them. You take a risk. So somebody says, I'm going to put a lot of money. I know that there is a lot of risk in the research of it. There is a lot of risk in the development of it. But if I can prove it, if the regulator approves the drug, then I price it to a price that then multiplied by the number of patients is going to get me a return on that investment, and that is how biotech and pharma work. So
Sure.
I think that is well understood. Where I see a very significant gap is now the questions that we keep asking ourselves is, everything seems to be happening what we call right of the boom. It's like only after you have the symptoms of the decline, you start doing something about it. But we do know that it may be decade or decades before that moment that the neurodegeneration starts. But the question is, okay, let's say that we, with a biomarker, like the blood-based biomarker that was approved this year, with tau biomarkers, you could have a reasonable, highly probabilistic suspicion that you will develop Alzheimer's in a decade. What can you do in those 10 years to either slow or stop that degeneration? And there is a lot of hypothesis and a lot of innovation that is happening on that area, but who's going to pay for it? And I think we have a structural problem for that.
You mean who's going to pay for that in terms of the healthcare system?
The intervention, whether it's lifestyle intervention, whether it's nutrition intervention, whether it is medical device intervention, whether it is a drug intervention.
Right.
And think about it. When there is a fire and the firefighters come and address it, we all do a big parade. Everybody celebrates firefighters, but nobody in society celebrates the people that prevent a fire from ever starting.
Yeah.
That is the problem that we have in the preventive stage, is how do you raise $100 billion and basically make an intervention that would eliminate those $350 billion or at least cut them by half?
Right. Listen, I have to say, this you've said a lot, and a lot of things that...
And I was just halfway.
Yeah, you were just halfway on the hardware issue. First of all, I don't believe that you say you're the least knowledgeable. Let's just start there. And secondly, congratulations for being able to do this in a cohesive way, coherent way on a Thursday morning in Davos. I think most of the people in the room are as captured by what you're saying as I am. We've now heard you speak about the hardware problem. I think is where we left it. Talk to us about the software problem.
Well, and I think some of the problems, again, I think you almost have to speak out about the intervention, because like in AI, the hardware and the software is very interrelated. For those that are technologists in the room, we have had the AI software. I did my thesis in AI in 1992, neural networks applied to speech recognition. I didn't have GPUs. I didn't have GPUs. So you need the hardware to actually get the software to work. The brain is a little bit like that. It's very unclear what is an intervention in the neurology of the brain that actually creates, let's say, an improvement in depression. And that's why I think the psychiatry is such a hard area to actually develop drugs. But my point is, let's say that we have a lot of software interventions that are lifestyle, that is nutrition, that is meditating apps, that is a lot of things that we could prove that when you do those interventions, you actually are going to have valid clinical outcomes of delaying or preventing Alzheimer's.
Right.
The question is, who's going to pay for those interventions? And here's where the problem lies. In a system like in the United States, the main problem to solve is that the people that would pay for those interventions are different than the people that actually collect the benefits.
Yep. Yep.
So what we actually need, again, when I came back and I said, wait a minute, we have solved this in other areas. We know how to solve this for traffic. In a big city, when there's going to be a massive problem of traffic 10 years from now, there is not a traffic problem today, but they know there's going to be a traffic problem 10 years from now. Do you know what they do? They raise a bond, and they build a highway, a toll highway, for the next 5 years. Then the traffic problem happens, but now you have the toll freeway, and then everybody pays back to the bond holders that actually paid for that, and the circle is complete. We're thinking, George and I have been talking about, we need models like that for the interventions, for the preventive interventions, where right now, somebody could come up with the intervention. We could take, let's say, pick a big city like Dallas. Maybe we can save the city of Dallas in 10 years, $20 billion on brain health-related costs that will not happen because we did that.
Right.
We need to go track those $10 billion and say, city, you can keep $5 billion, but we need to take another $5 billion to pay back the people that made that intervention. And that's where technology can give us some clues, like blockchain, like tokenizing the benefits, like a lot of areas that I want to explore that would actually make it viable to do the same thing that happens for the toll highway, which is you can actually find the capital.
Excellent. Listen, my mind, I hope it still works well. It's absolutely blown by all of the concepts that you've introduced, and that all makes a lot of sense. So let me maybe ask Chiara, because you work, of course, on the government side of things, the policy side of things, I suppose, at Bristol-Myers Squibb. You heard Jesus say, the issue is really a little bit more on that side. It's sort of like, as a society, we haven't decided how we're going to be able to pay for that and how we're going to make the economics work. From your point of view, where do you see the possibilities to sort of bridge this gap when you interact as business with government on this specific issue?
Thank you so much for having me, and really thank you to the DAC for organizing such an amazing program over a very intense Davos week with all kind of other discussion going on as well. So I think this is the key point. This is not the key point only for brain health. It's key point in the life science innovation. If you think about all the demographics and an aging population in the Western world, the preventive care, how we mobilize capitals, and how we kind of look at the return of capitals for society, governments, patients, and people, this is the key challenge of our times. So as we think through this at BMS, and generally speaking in the companies, technology or pharmaceutical involved in driving innovation to patients is really a couple of points. One is raising the awareness of the economic impact of brain health disorders for policymakers. I think that we still have some ground to cover there. Has been done, BMS has been for a long, long time, it still is an oncology company, very invested in oncology, and we have been very invested in brain health, and we are coming back in brain health. We did this for oncology. We did this for cardiovascular. As you were talking and thinking about preventing care, think about what happened with cardiovascular. When we discovered that high level of cholesterol was a very high risk factor for cardiovascular, and now, I don't want to ask this question, but how many in this room are on statin? So, many.
Do I have to feel bad because I don't know?
No, you have to feel good, but you will be on statin at some point in your life. We will all be, and because it's been demonstrated that keeping the cholesterol down is really addressing preventive care and reducing the cardiovascular risk. And the big discussion 20 years ago was the same. Who is going to pay for that? And but the demonstration of the benefit, not only for the patient, which is the most important thing, but also from an economic and societal standpoint, socioeconomic factor. So basically, when you think about HTA and health economics, is something that I think we have a ground to cover in the brain health to raise the awareness of the economic impact. And therefore, that will raise the need for public and private investment into early diagnosis, preventing care, as well as for innovation to reach the patient. Because you were both saying the same. We can bring innovation forward, and it's a huge, huge investment, and it's not only the money that we need to put on the trials, it's the risk of failure. Think about, as we think about disease-modifying therapies in the Alzheimer setting, how many failures we had in the past few years, but this is how innovation works. You need to fail to really finally get that right. So it's the investment there, and it needs to reach the patient, because innovation that doesn't reach the patient is really not helpful. So this is the big piece. The other two words is working together. So the technology piece, the pharmaceutical piece, as well as more the societal piece, with the policy makers to bring public-private partnership, also new financing models to support that.
I mean, when I hear you identify the problem and where really is the blocker or the sort of fork in the road, actually I get the impression that it's neither capital nor innovation nor technology, which were the three things we were going to explore today, but that it's rather at the end of the road. You keep on using this road metaphor. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to get this right, but basically at the end of the road, when you get to the point where you have to find a way to pay for it, where you have to have an agreement between the business bringing it to the market and the government, and I suppose the healthcare system more broadly, that's where the issue currently lies. That's why you don't get a huge increase in the capital invested. It would be there if at the end of the road it would be clear how you would get how it would be paid for by society.
Yes, I think that is one of the main challenges, because if you think who is sitting here, we could find a way to work together in 2 minutes and to get even private capitals to flow in to fund innovation. The big piece is, and if I think especially in Europe, but US is a little bit different, but still at the end of the day the same problem. Who is going to pay for that? For the European public health systems is really to be able to find that innovation. So to me, there's a couple of points that we need to work together on. So the European healthcare systems are working by silos. So if I go to a regulatory agency and say, okay, you're paying for this new technology or this new drug, but this much money, but you're going to save this much money in hospitalization, in social care, in loss of productivity, they're going to tell me, that's amazing. Unfortunately, I am accountable only for this piece of budget or that piece of budget. So this is where we need to work together to raise to the policymakers the need to really overcome this silos budget, because if you look at the economic benefit of a new technology, you will see that the increase, the additional amount of money that you need to put in the system is much lower than you think, because you need to bring all together the benefits. So this is one piece. The other piece is we need also to work together to raise the need to develop the healthcare infrastructure that can deliver the innovation. So who is going to pay for that and who is going to deliver that, which is also a piece of payment, but it's a critical piece. The more we bring together technology and, let's say, pharmaceutical innovation, we need a delivery system. We need an healthcare integrated, patient-centric infrastructure that can deliver that innovation to patients.
Excellent. I think we're getting somewhere here. Just unfortunately, there's not, I suppose, that many people of the healthcare system in terms of the public officials in the panel or in the room. So we'll need to tell them very quickly after this panel that we solved the issue. If only they would just reorganize.
You just need to apply.
So I want to get to you, Elisabeth. And by the way, before I get to you, Elisabeth, I just want to say, how nice is it? By the way, nice chairs also, a nice environment. But how nice is it to have like this old school Davos panel where you have like people from different stakeholders, different countries, trying to work out a global solution for a global problem. I mean, isn't this nice? Right? Amazing. Elisabeth, with that, we sort of identified where the issue is. You of course have your interactions with, I suppose, the German government and the healthcare system, the European, and globally, everywhere. Siemens Healthineers is everywhere. So do you agree with that? And do you feel like you can get to a solution?
I would want to add one very important dimension which we've not really covered yet. So we spoke about the science, we spoke about some of the diagnostic technologies, we spoke about the funding, and now we are jumping to saying, well, it's just the governments need to understand, they need to write the check, and then we'll be fine. I think there is a big piece in between, which is about getting the care to the people. And today, this is super clunky, and it's super expensive.
Give us an example.
So today, just imagine you're a patient suffering from symptoms connected to Alzheimer's, so you may already sometimes maybe not be on top of things and be able to organize everything for yourself. First, someone needs to get to the point that you get a diagnosis. Yeah? Then somebody will say, well, you are the type of patient who can potentially benefit from that drug. Then somebody needs to prescribe the drug. Unfortunately, the drug doesn't work the way that you just take it regularly and you go check in with your physician every year and you're fine. Taking this drug comes with the need to really monitor, is it working? Which means you have to do scans. This is what the current protocols currently use. So you need to go and do imaging scans every 2 or 3 months. Now imagine you're an Alzheimer's patient who needs to navigate this complexity. First you need a doctor, you need a diagnosis, you need to get the drug, and then you have to schedule your follow-up scans, you have to somehow wait for the response, you have to then digest what is the response, you have to again schedule that next scan, which may or may not be available as easily and where you are.
I have to
so
say,
it's very complicated to be a patient in that wonderful system.
The point is taken. And I asked you for a specific example, and that was very specific, and I can almost feel the pain of anyone going through that process as you go through it. And so I guess you're doing the right thing here, is to bring us back to earth, being realistic. Sure, there is a bottleneck at the government level, but really it's a whole healthcare system and a whole healthcare system delivery. Then, of course, the question becomes, how can all the actors here and even those outside the room, how can they actually come together to bring that systemic change?
I
It will require collaboration across the different pieces, and we actually just this week announced a very interesting program we are running with EU funding called Access AD, so Access Alzheimer's Disease. And this is a consortium of 30 different parties who can contribute. It's academia, it's science, it's people like us, it's physicians, it's people from the regulator side.
Right.
And the aim of
And you
this...
convened them, or who was the convener?
In this case, we were leading, bringing these different players together, but we also in other areas contributors to these types of consortia. And the aim of this Access ID consortium is to look for patient-centric ways of making treatments really accessible at scale.
And then the innovation comes there from finding out together how do you reorganize that system, and then each can go and play their role. Maybe one more question for you, Tracy. You've sort of said where the V-Center plays. You identify clear gaps in that early stage, let's say. When you hear this and when you know that down the road there's an even bigger bottleneck, a systemic bottleneck, is it then, do you feel the need to sort of go to Hans-Jörg or the CEO of the organization and say, hey, I know we're doing really useful work, at the beginning, but it seems like we may also need to work at the end? Or are you like, it's just not where we can make the biggest difference?
No, we actually, we tried to think of it as a continuum. I think the V-Center's role really is to, and I say this a lot of times, to help these early innovative startups and entrepreneurs get over the first valley of death. So I think we all have heard about the valley of death, right? When it comes to innovation, making it to the system. So at the V-Center, we focus on sort of the first, let's say, pre-seed and seed investment in these companies to get them, into markets. But it still requires an enormous amount of capital. I mean, we have a great relationship, of course, with his family office, who also invests in a little bit later stage companies. So what we do, and they do, often bridge things, because in brain health, we know that even if you get over the first valley of death, there's probably 3 or 4 other valleys of death as you're going towards commercialization. So it's very expensive.
Yeah, no, that doesn't sound like a valley I want to be in. Chiara, I want to get to you one final time before we maybe go to the audience for some questions. You made, I think, a very compelling case for sort of, we need to work more together with basically the entire healthcare system, but from our company to outside the company. Does that, in your company and others like Bristol Myers Squibb, are you less sort of working in silos than the counterparts from government that you meet? Are you able within the company to align everything to drive that systemic change? Are we on the record?
Yes. No, it's a great question because you know that large corporations tend to be a little bit like the government. So we still have some silos, so we can do better all the time. But the way it's embedded in how the pharmaceutical business works, that we need to do that. Because we need to work from in a continuum from, let's say, the discovery of a new molecule to deliver that molecule to a patient. Right. So we really need to bring together the piece of the discovery and the development piece, the trial piece. So the science piece goes together with let's say a market access strategy. So when we discover a molecule and we get some initial proof points and we get into testing that in clinical trial, then we start thinking, okay, how are we going to deliver that to patients? Right, exactly. So the pricing strategy, the market access strategy, and where are the gaps in the healthcare system and in the patient journey? You were talking about the patient journey. So we think very deeply into the patient journey and where our new technology, our new drugs can fit into the patient journey, and how we need to work with other pieces of the healthcare system, of the policymakers, the patient groups, the technology piece. So we really try to kind of cover the gaps and not work in silos. And I think we are becoming quite good, not necessarily only BMS. Generally speaking, the companies like BMS to do that and to think more holistically, how can we work all together to deliver? And you're right, it's not that if we just get the government just signing a check, we are fine. We will go in a very better position anyway if they're gonna kind of write a check. But we really need to contribute. I feel the need, our companies, to contribute and to work together with the public systems in how we address the big challenge of our times on how we pay for innovation to make that available. Innovation which is not available for people doesn't mean anything. It's an exercise. It's an intellectual exercise. And as someone very smart that built Europe, which was Jacques Delors, said, policy without a timeline is an academic exercise. So we need to work together also to be creative how we're going to fund innovation. And we have some examples. Think about what Europe is doing now with the defense, what has been done with the energy, what has been done with technology. We need to think more about public-private partnership, also in the financing system, because there's no way the public systems can handle that level of financing to drive the innovation to patients.
I think that's a fair reflection. I want to allow for at least one or two questions from the audience. We already have one here. It seems like we're doing a good job, because if the big man himself has a question, that means that everybody's paying attention.
I would just ask the question. This is one of the pieces of economy where the consumer doesn't drive the change. You have to work through a variety of government systems or government payment systems in order to get to the consumers. How do we get a consumer-innovator relationship? Why don't we start delivering direct to consumer rather than going through health systems? We can do telehealth to diagnose. Potentially we can do a variety of Amazon delivery services to get us the therapies. If as long as we can administer them ourselves through auto-injector, through whatever means, why not think about totally disrupting the current system and getting the consumer in the game?
Thank you. Who wants to take that one?
I'll make one comment, because I think this is something that we actually are really looking at very closely, and we're actually just about to spin in a company that's actually has a technology that they're currently using in sports. So it's a biofeedback, visual biofeedback technology for optimal performance. And they have a market in sports, which is actually not as big of a market as you would think. But they also think that the pupil is a window to the sort of the system in the brain that's responsible for arousal, which goes very awry in things like PTSD, anxiety, depression, et cetera. So what we're doing is we're actually helping them to move from a consumer market to a clinical market. And so I think it can go both ways, but there's been an inordinate amount of failures in the direct-to-consumer neurotech space for sleep, for a lot of different things. So I mean, I think we need to think about the sort of bidirectionality, really.
Jesus.
No, I was going to say it's as hard of a problem to change the behavior of a consumer as it is to figure out how to get all of these different agencies and elements of the patient journey to actually have common incentives to align their investment. In the technology side, direct to consumer is the highest % of failure. So you have, for every one killer app, like you would say in medicine would be the GLP-1s. That's your killer app for the consumer. It's like, well, I don't really care, I'm just gonna take it, right? But it's not an obvious thing, especially in the areas of convincing somebody to live healthier. That's a very, very, very hard thing to do.
Right.
So it's not that easy.
So we don't have the killer app yet. I had a question there, and then a final question there. I'll go and bring you the microphone. And please introduce yourself, and then ask a question.
Sure, thanks. I'm Harris, and Executive Director of the new Global Brain Economy Initiative, which we launched yesterday. there's a genius in the room that gave me an idea that I want to ask you guys what you think about it. The genius will know who they are when I start speaking. Do you think we should take this show, Peter, that you said is so effective in the Davos spirit, to Jackson Hole, to the Reserve Bank governors meeting, to talk about brain investing, threading between government, philanthropy, and private? It seems like that is one place that we haven't been before as a community. Could you imagine sitting, the Reserve Bank governors that are concerned about the productivity of nation states, the Wall Street people that are seeking returns, donors that are there? Is that a kind of forum that we should go to start to develop new strategies for brain investing, to take ourselves to the next level, to, as you said, sort of reposition this whole conversation into a productivity growth, sort of strengthening nation states? Do you think, and how should we optimize that if we do it?
Thank you. As you reflect on that question, I had a question a couple of months ago when you had the Jackson Hole meeting from a Belgian radio station. They asked, since you know all about Davos, can you tell us more about Jackson Hole? And I said, well, I'm not so sure. So I did the right thing and did my research with sources, no hallucinations of AI, and found out what the origins was. And it turns out that, I don't know if you know this, but that it actually was started as like an initiative of simply the Kansas City or the Kansas Reserve Bank, sort of saying we want to bring some interesting academic perspectives. In the beginning, it was all about the agricultural economy, because of course you're in the Midwest. And then over time, it became more and more interesting, and a little bit organically, like Davos, became what it is today. With that, Jesus, over to you.
No, I think it's worth trying. I think one of the elements that we said in the panels is the increased awareness of the size of the opportunity of brain health and the actual proven interventions. Those two kind of like gaps have to be closed. In the drugs that are approved today, I mean, it took decades, and still it felt like a religious war in the scientific community as to whether amyloid beta is or is not predictive of any clinical improvement. And there's been a ton written about that by people that just dedicated 20 years to prove one side or other of the theory. So I think that is a very important element of trying to bring a common set of definitions and standards and clarity on here's the size of the problem. Just on Alzheimer, 350 billion. So if you put the entire brain health, I think McKinsey said is 6.2 trillion. And then the other side of it is the if-then. If you do this intervention 5 years before you're gonna have symptoms, this is the statistically valid expectation you have of reducing that probability. Once you have that, I think it would be very helpful to start a roadshow of every element of the people that have to be part of the solutions. One of them is the financing system,
Sure.
Public and private, but also remember in ease of this very complicated patient journey, each side of them, they have what I would call perverse incentives. So even though we will care a lot about threading everything and making it perfect for that patient, at every time there is a trade-off by that element of the solution to be made as to whether do they dedicate their energy, resources, effort, marketing to solve that, or is it better for them to basically go to oncology or use the infusion bed instead of for Alzheimer's for oncology because they're gonna get more reimbursement, or instead of doing a PET amyloid, they're gonna do something else because, it's like, that is the thread that unless we close, then we end up with this problem, which is everybody will agree that somebody else needs to do something about it.
Right, and that's not the... who wants to go? Maybe one more person, and then we've got one final question from the floor.
I think it's a very interesting thought, and there is also a link to conversations which are also happening around Davos and have been happening around Davos in the past few days. And this is around this topic of longevity and the longevity dividend. Yeah? So how do we use the reality that we have the opportunity to live longer to unlock a dividend for society? What change does it take? What do we need to do to not only have this more longer lifespan, but also extend the health span? And this is very, very closely connected to brain health.
Excellent.
Right? Because many of the other things kind of, somehow we have the solutions for brain health. We maybe are beginning to see things emerging, and that might be another angle going beyond the reimbursement, going beyond just discussing within the healthcare system, which can unlock additional interest and additional energy to work on these things.
Very, very good. Final question. I'll come to you with a microphone.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting discussion. My name is Adrian. I was coming back to the idea of direct to consumer and to your point, Jesus, about raising the capital for prevention. Because I mean, one of the things that I see in the younger generation is that more and more people from a longevity and preventative health perspective are very interested in learning more about themselves. So I think in that sector there is huge potential to tap into direct consumers if there is, for example, genetic testing that becomes available at scale and has a reduced price, and or other technologies that enable, for example, early onset detection, because that's the point when you can actually really do something about it. And I think then you find also possibilities to finance preventative treatments, because people will be incentivized if they feel, well, I have a so-and-so risk to develop this. If I invest in these lifestyle changes, I might be able to avoid it. And I think especially the longevity market taps into that as well.
Excellent. Well, that statement ended with a question mark. Yeah. Does anyone want to weigh in on
Just
that?
I'll do. I mean, just.
Well,
just
maybe hold
sorry,
on.
go
Maybe I'll let Chiara speak first.
No, just a quick comment. I think as we think about direct-to-consumer, I will think of that as a piece of the puzzle that we needing to incorporate in a more integrated patient-centric system. Because if you think about addressing brain health disorders, there's a number of components, which is the early diagnosis, the telemedicines. There's a huge involvement of caregivers, because many, especially in the late stages of the disease, it's not that the patient is going to be able to administer or make a proper choice of what to do of her personal health. So there's a huge engagement of families and caregivers, and there's a huge involvement of all the healthcare and social system to take care of the patients. So I think there's a big piece that we could look at direct consumer, which is really education of patients and general population to start thinking about early diagnosis, symptoms, and what they can really, how they can leverage on technology to help them going through the early stages and diagnosis and preventive. That's to me is a huge piece where we need to deal with consumers directly.
Excellent. Any closing thoughts from you, Jesus?
Just to augment that, in the United States, there is a company called Function Health. So any consumer can go in and you can test on anything, and one of those biomarkers is tau and A-beta ratios. So there is elements that you can do that, and but what happens is, okay, so I get my p-tau 217, and it's 143, and then it's like, what do you do about that? Well, then you have to go to the beginning of all of that. Then you have to go to your PCP. The PCP is not equipped to know what to do with it. You're gonna take 3 years just going around with memory tests. You seem normal. It's like, that's the whole point. I wanna stay normal. I don't want to do something. Eventually you get a neurologist, and the first thing they'll say is like, why did you take that test? That test, you're only supposed to take it after you actually do that. So that's why the challenge of the consumer angle is, you may address one sporadic element of it, but one is very hard, and two, it's not clear to me that it would actually be this smooth patient journey to actually prevent the disease.
Fair. Tracy, I don't want to be biased, because I'm from Geneva and you're in Geneva, and Geneva is the greatest city in the world. But I thought maybe you could close us out with some final reflections before we end the panel.
I actually just wanted to Harris's point. I wanted to say something because actually about 15 years ago, when I was prior to being at the Wyss Center, I spent 7 years at DARPA in the U.S. And I actually met Patrick Kennedy at a retreat in Wyoming in Jackson Hole, where we went to Jim Wolfson's house, who was the former head of the World Bank, and we were launching the One Mind for Research. And the point I wanted to make was that I think it's really important to also think about the equity piece, because as a government employee at that time, I could barely actually afford to go. So what we need to make sure is that we have the right people, and the people who can actually do the bidding having access to these types of things, because it is so important to talk to all of the people who have all of the capital in the world. But we also need to make sure that the government people who are on a budget, I can tell you, and probably a tighter budget now than it used to be, can also be there to weigh in, because they're the ones who are going to have to implement it into the system.
Excellent, and I actually do think that is good as a closing reflection. You know, we've identified some of the pain points in this journey of advancing brain health. We've identified some of the solutions, and I think we ended it as you said it, and I think Dr. Tedros said it earlier, that you do at the end of the day need an all-of-society approach, even if you have certain pieces of the puzzles already in place or ready to go, which include finance and working together across partnerships. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank all the panelists for joining us, and I'd say let's see each other in Wyoming.
Do you want to moderate the session in Jackson?